It's a pleasure to follow the Noble Baroness, and as much so to follow the Noble Baroness Parmenter as well, who was very generous in what she said, and I agreed with everything she said, particularly that part. I want to congratulate the committee for putting together a really valuable report, and if I may, I'm going to focus initially, at least, on the international role of the UK, both in terms of agitation, but also in terms of leading by example. I think the UK has a particular role to play. Now, logically, it's an obvious thing to say, but there is nothing more important than mending our relationship with the natural world. Absolutely everything we have, everything we need, everything we do, our entire economic system is based on nature, which is why the damage we're doing to it all around the world is just so mad. The damage to our rivers, our mangroves, our corals, our forests. If you consider that if I more or less keep to my time now, by the time I finish, but by the time I sit down, we'll have lost the equivalent of nearly 400 football pitches worth of forest. And it almost defies belief and imagination. And these are forests that are home to 4/5 of the world's terrestrial biodiversity. Around 1 billion people depend on them for their survival. And the forests, as we know, regulate just so much, not least our climate, but our rainfall. The Congo Basin alone is believed to generate more than half of the rainfall for the entire continent of Africa. So this isn't just an issue of biodiversity, and it's certainly not just an academic discussion we're having. And the reality is there is no technological substitute for these systems. The only solution and the ultimate challenge is finding a way to protect what remains, to restore what we have carelessly lost, and then to do everything we can through all of our decision-making to reconcile ourselves, our cultures, our civilizations, our economies with the natural world on which we depend. And I say it's an obvious thing to say, and I think for this room, I'm certain for this room it didn't need to be said, but it is an argument that needs to be made repeatedly. And the reason for that is that far too often when we hear debates about the environment, or when the environment is discussed as a political issue, we're not actually talking about the environment. We've reduced that whole thing down to a very, very narrow focus on carbon and climate change. It's an extraordinarily one-dimensional discussion that we're having most of the time. And the reality is that we could put all the solar panels in the world on all of the rooftops around the planet. We could invest 10 times more in energy efficiency. If we don't massively ramp up our efforts to protect and restore nature, it's all pointless. There is no pathway to net zero. There is no solution to climate change without forests. And I think it's really important that we keep our conversation as broad as possible. Climate change is an overwhelming threat, but it is a symptom, just one symptom, of an underlying and abusive relationship we have with the natural world. Well, of course, I don't want to in any way sound like I'm discouraging efforts to accelerate the much-needed energy or clean energy transition. It is crucial, I think, that we ramp up our focus on nature, on preventing nature loss. And by the way, we know we can do it. There are examples all around the world. I had the privilege of being a minister for the international environment. I saw with my own eyes initiatives on a tiny scale, initiatives on a huge scale, initiatives sometimes on a national scale, where countries have managed to break the link between productivity, prosperity, and environmental destruction. In fact, I've just come back from Indonesia just a couple of days ago. I hate flying. I have to be drunk to get on an airplane, so I'm probably not making as much sense now as I'd like to be. But I can tell you that in Indonesia, a country that has taken a lot of flack over many years for high rates historically of deforestation, has got its deforestation under control. They don't get the credit for it, but they have. The data doesn't lie. They've broken the link between palm oil production and deforestation. There is still some deforestation, of course, but it is nothing compared to what it was. And if all the great forest countries behaved in a way that Indonesia has, we'd be having a very different discussion. So we know it can be done. Noble Lords will remember a few years ago we had the privilege of hosting COP in Glasgow, COP26, which we made an effort to turn into a kind of nature COP. So we wanted to broaden the focus, and we delivered the Glasgow Leaders Declaration on forests. We've got 145 countries representing 90% of the world's forests to commit to end deforestation this decade. We secured $20 billion to support those countries to do it, and we persuaded the multilateral development agencies to align their policies, their portfolios with that same aim. And I think it did represent, in theory at least, an unprecedented package of support for us. And I would like to put on the record my thanks to really extraordinarily talented people in the sort of invisible part of government, the people who don't normally take part in these debates, but who do the real work. Because without any doubt, that was a consequence of an extraordinarily effective diplomatic effort. Since then, we attempted to take that same energy, that same approach, the same momentum to Montreal, which was about a year later. And in order to have an impact, in order to be able to influence the debate, we protected those diplomatic networks that we created. We remained co-leaders of the High Ambition Coalition, the Global Ocean Alliance, organizations designed to extract maximum ambition from countries with which we get on well. We spearheaded with Ecuador, the Maldives, Gabon, a program